Binta, thanks so much for being here. I know you're busy and I appreciate you making the time.
We need to
Um,
start a meeting like this, Emil. I think it was
yeah, I
a
know.
year ago we had something similar. It was for the leadership talk, and I'm like, my goodness, here we are
I know.
again. So
I know. I know. Well, it's always nice to see you. I'll give a kind of an overview about what this talk is, but you'll get into detail about what a career lattice and everything. And I think that this is an important discussion because uh, we've seen that the workforce has evolved over the years, and so has the work that we do. It's changed drastically even over the last decade, and yet in a lot of ways, how we look for jobs, how we recruit talent is kind of stuck in the 80s or 90s. That at least the perception is that it's stuck that in that the previous century, and that's unfortunate. But I think once people understand how hiring units actually look for talent, and different ways that you as somebody looking for a job or a career can sort of see the landscape and capitalize on it, it can really open up a whole new world for you. And that's why this is going to be such a enlightening discussion, I think, for a lot of people out there. Just kind of breaking down the misperceptions and assumptions is going to be very helpful. Unfortunately, we have Binta Brown here today, who has a very broad experience in career and talent development. I'll give you a chance to kind of give your background, but you have what some might sort of see as a non-traditional career path. And that's going to be a interesting kind of discussion and anecdote of how people can learn from you. Binta is the Director of Diversity and Talent Management for the CFO's portfolio, which is the Financial Administrative Services portfolio here at the University of Texas at Austin. And she rose to that position after working and helping people in a variety of different roles. So just as we start out, Binta, can you tell us a little bit about your own career journey?
yeah, thank you so much for that introduction, Emil. Many of us we grew up, with being asked this one particular question. So, what do you want to be when you grow up, right? And that's so much pressure on an individual. And so it had to take like a complete mental shift in me and focus on what kind of work I want to do. How do I want to contribute my talents to society? How do I want to help people? What aspects of the job that I do that I absolutely love that I want to continue? Where are some areas for improvement? And so I started out. Actually, I think my career started out volunteering for a nonprofit whilst I was in college. And I showed up for that volunteer position every day on time, like I was getting paid for it. And what happened is that after a year of doing that, it naturally transitioned to a full-time position, management position at a nonprofit. And I did that for about a year, 2 years, and an incident at that organization really made me stop and think about the human experience, why people behave. And that's how I ended up going back to school for a master's degree in counseling, right? Really trying to understand what makes people tick, what motivates people, right? And so I did mental health counseling and therapy for many, many years, over a decade. But I did have a degree in management, right? And so after a while, was starting to get burnt out, and I was like, I'm ready to make this shift. I don't feel like I'm excited about the work that I do anymore. And so I was like, how can I find a position that takes both of my experiences and my degrees, and it marries well? And so I had an opportunity to apply and interview for a career, director of career services at a mid-sized university. Hands down, one of my exhilarating and exhausting jobs ever, but I had a fantastic team. And so in my work in therapy and in the career services, there was a common theme about people's, their identity being so entrenched with the work that they do, right? And having so many struggles in terms of pivoting, choosing a career choosing a major, how do I know it's the right one? How do I even figure out what I want to be when I grow up? And I tell people all this time, I still don't know what I want to be when I grow up, right? But I know the type of work that I want to do. And it's okay if it changes. That's okay. And so after I left my career services work, I was fortunate enough to land a job at UT in a very hybrid role, where on one side I worked with HR, and on paper it was to spearhead this new initiative where I pretty much provide counsel to mid to upper level search committees, from anywhere from taking a look at the job description to negotiating the best offer for the final candidate. And on the other side of things, I work with the provost office, providing a suite of career coaching services to high profile faculty, prospective faculty that UT wanted to bring to campus. Their partners and spouses who were professionals in their own right. So I was really entrenched in career development stuff, career coaching, talent management, recruitment, and it all worked well. And so I'm going to, give kudos to my supervisor at the time in that position, Karen Chona. I would always go to her and say, I want to learn more. I want to do more. Here's what I encountered. I think there's an opportunity for this type of training. And I feel really lucky that she just kind of gave me the reins to just, yes, go ahead and do it. Go ahead and build it. And that just kind of spawned into me creating implicit bias trainings, because there was a need, right, for inclusive hiring training, because there was a need, and that job after 4 years turned into my current role. So here I am. So I've kind of been all over the place, but when you take a look at it, you can see how you can connect the dots, right? But I didn't wake up, or I didn't grow up dreaming, well, first I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to do, X, Y, Z, and lo and behold, it's going to turn into my current role. No, a lot of times our careers it's happenstance, right? We meet the right people, or we get introduced to the some interesting work that we never thought about, and so you just kind of be open-minded, and if it's worth the risk, you go along for the ride, so to speak. But I know that I have that type of personality where I'm always open-minded, and I try to make the best of what I have, going into it with a very positive mindset and looking for opportunities to add value to the organization. So
yeah, I think that has some of us who and I don't know if they still do this in school, where you take the test and tells you what career path you should be on, and that sort of mindset still persists today. And for some people, that can be sort of paralyzing to think, okay, well, once I have chosen to be on this path, I am locked in that way. And so that may be a reason why some people take so long and hem and haw and worry about getting on this path that they think is non-divergent, that once you're going that way, you have to be on it. And it really doesn't work that way anymore. And we're going to talk about, jumping paths a little bit too. And I think that's why, the career lattice concept is so important. But before we get into that, I want to hear about what your goals are in your relatively new role as the Diversity and Talent Management Director for FAS. Just, I know there are a lot. I know it's broad, but just kind of quickly, what are your big goals?
You know what? When my 4-year-old daughter asked me when I first took on the job, what is it that you do? My very simple answer was, I help enhance organizational culture so that everybody can feel welcome and do their best work. And I think there is this natural synergy between, equity, inclusion, and diversity work, as well as talent management, right? And so when you look at attraction, how we attract people, how we retain people, recruit people, onboard people, develop and coach people, even how we, people separate from the university. Universally, every employee goes through those stages of the employee life cycle, right? And so it's all about, fundamentally, how do people experience their workplaces? Because we spend most of our time at work with our colleagues. Well, maybe not so much in the last year, but you know what I mean. right? And so how do I work? It's very much a collaborative role because I cannot do this solo. All EDI work, a lot of people tend to see it as something separate. It's not. If you think about human or employee issues, there is this thread of
Yeah.
equity, inclusion, and diversity, right? And it really should be embedded or woven deeply into all the work that we do. And so on a very broad level, like I tell my 4-year-old daughter, it's creating, the culture where everybody can show up, where everybody can feel like they belong. Because at the end of the day, Emil, everybody on this talk has had an experience and when they felt excluded, and it's icky. It's not nice. It really affects you psychologically. It impairs your productivity. And sometimes we just need to slow down to see how all of these things are connected, right, to employee performance and productivity. So in a nutshell, that's my job. That's what I'm here to do.
Yeah, I think that that's where a lot of organizations get into trouble when they think about or try and implement diversity programming, is they think of it at this sort of extracurricular or this independent tool, like learning how to use a new application or something, and they don't understand that it's everywhere. It needs to be in the ether. And that's why I'm really excited to have you in this role, because you have that understanding. You with a lot of other people, I think, who are your partners and collaborators with this enormous undertaking. So, as I mentioned, some people might see your career path as non-traditional because it's not linear, right? Like you sort of followed your heart, you followed your curiosity, you
Yeah.
saw where there was opportunity and you went there. Not necessarily, not like as in your personal ambition opportunity, but there was a need somewhere and you wanted to try and address that need. So talk a little bit more about that non-linear path in terms of career development, and then explain how that applies to this notion of a career lattice.
Yeah, and I tell people and clients that I work with, outside of my job, I tell people fundamentally when an employer posts a job, they have a problem and they want to hire somebody who can solve that problem for them. And sometimes when you go into the job, the position, you realize, oh, wow, there's some other issues that I can, my strengths can actually lend to. And sometimes your leader or your boss or your supervisor may be so overwhelmed with other things that they may need you to come in and say, hey, I noticed this, or I've encountered that, or we've gotten a lot of complaints about this, and I'm wondering, or here's my idea. I tell people, don't come to your supervisor, your boss, with what the problems are, but most importantly, solve the problems, come up with creative ideas, and be willing to just kind of roll up your sleeves and do the work. A personal story, when I was considering applying for my former job at UT, I was not excited about it. I said, you know what, I can do this job with my eyes closed. I came from a director position where it was fast and furious, and there was a lot of variety. And this role was, whilst it was a new initiative on HR side, I was just like, huh. But because I had new personal developments in my life, I was like, maybe it's a time for me to just kind of take a step back. I don't necessarily have to pursue another director level position. I think it was a coordinator or consulting role. And I said, okay, fine, begrudgingly, if I'm going to be honest, I said, I will do it and we'll see. I always tend to make my decision on how long I'll stay in a job after the first 3 to 6 months. I kind of gauge, okay, where is there opportunity? How can I add value? Always. And it kind of grew on me. And again, going back to, I had a supervisor where, I spoke to her very candidly about, this is what I want to know, how the other aspects of the organization kind of work together in unison, to fulfill this mission. There's an opportunity here. I want to do that. So for instance, with the training, one of my first search committees, it was all white male on the panel. And I said, wow. I spoke to the chair. I was very
How
upset.
big of a panel?
It was five white males on a panel. And I said,
Mhm.
what are the implications of a woman of color, for example, like me, applying for a job and having to interview with all five males? What message are you conveying? Does the department look like that as well? And how do I fit in? How does that impact my, my development, my growth, my opportunities for development and advancement? And he was very open and he said, you know what? I had never thought about it. This is a predominantly white institution. He doesn't have to think about it because he is in the majority, right? So he's privileged. I, as a woman of color, I notice these things. And that's typically how privilege works, right? You notice people who look like you and when people don't look like you. And so it was a teachable moment for him. And then the next step was, okay, so let's talk about implicit bias. Do we have a training? And so I kind of got ping-ponged around to, who does this training on campus? And I just came back to Karen and I said, look, nobody wants to do this training. Apparently this training does not exist. And when I tell you, Emil, I went down a rabbit hole without a flashlight and a friend, and I did research. I reached out to my network, people who were doing this type of work. I tried to understand, what is evidence-based practice around implicit bias training, particularly around hiring. And I created this training and I said, Karen, here it is. Since nobody wants to take ownership of this training, then I'll do it. Now, I did tell her, I do not want to be trapped as a training and development professional. While I enjoy doing a little bit of it, I don't want this to be my absolute job. I don't want this to be not even 50% of my job, right? And so that's just one example of how, different opportunities in my former job, kind of led me down this path, into my current role. So, I mean, there's so many different stories of different folks that I've worked with, my friends and my colleagues, where I was like, if this is something that you're interested in, well, how else can you get the experience, right? You can't get the experience without the job. You can't get the job without the experience.
Right.
What a conundrum, right? So
Right.
what do you do? It's like, well, my current department doesn't have any openings, but so how else can you do it? Rather than giving people the answers, I try to just kind of provide thought-provoking questions. Think about it. Who's in your network? You can volunteer, you can serve on a board, you can be a freelancer, you can write a blog, you can get noticed anywhere, right? I tell people are the most valuable things ever, because it's not buildings that create organizations, it's people that create organizations and actually do the work, right? And so people own resources, information, and opportunity. And that's why relationships always matter, no matter what product or service that you're selling, right? And I think, I'd like to think that part of my career journey and success, really, I'm always myself, Emil. This is who I am. I've always practiced just bringing your authentic self to work. Sometimes it may not necessarily be well received, but I like to believe in giving people ample opportunity to warm up to me, right? It's differences that really make us great.
So you raise an interesting point, inadvertently or not. You talked about how when you had this conversation with Karen, that you said something along the lines, I don't want to get trapped into doing training and development work. And I think that's really an important thing to point out, because in your journey of either exploration, it's like project planning. You want to decide what's in scope, but it's equally as important to figure out what's out of scope. And then being very explicit to either your mentors, your coaches, your allies, that this is what you're looking for, but let me make clear, this is what I'm not willing to do. And yourself, because you want to be explicit about that and saying, something's not sitting right with me. Oh, I know what it is. I'm worried that if I go down this path, I'm going to be either pigeonholed or I'm going to end up doing this work that I don't have a real long-term interest in.
Yeah, and it's so important to kind of know who you are and know what you want. That's such an important part of this process, this career development process. You can't really wait for your boss or the organization to come to you and identify you for as high potential, right? I think there are lots of high potential people all throughout our portfolio, but they haven't been given the opportunity to really showcase that, right?
Yeah.
So we just tend to take people what they do every day, day in, day out, as that's who Binta is, that's what she does, and not and part of it is really getting to know your colleagues, right? What their interests are. Sometimes, providing this career lattice, and I'll just provide the definition right now.
Yeah, yeah,
It's just this notion that employees can really chart their own career development within the organization, and it takes a multi-directional movement. So it doesn't necessarily, it's one-dimensional, vertical, like the career ladder. You kind of have to climb the ladder, and when you get to the top, I tell people all the time, what do you fall off or you die, what you retire? And that works well for certain industries and certain jobs, right? Some people are blessed or gifted where from the time they came out of the womb, Emil, they knew that they wanted to be a blank. You fill in the blank, right? And so then there's a natural progression for how do they, they get there. And that works. But for many of us, where, it's just like, I'm just kind of stumbling along what feels right, or I kind of feel like I'm stuck in this job. I'm not quite sure, what I want to do, but I know I want to have a job that offers meaning, that's purposeful, but I also want to provide for my family, right? And so the whole notion of the career lattice is that you can manage your career in so many different directions. And I tell, like I said, most people thought that, okay, I went from a director role in my former job before coming to UT. The natural progression is for me to get another director role, but I actively did not apply for another director role because, again, at the time I was pregnant and first time mom, I did not know what the heck I was doing. I don't know what the experience was going to be like. And I thought I owed it to myself, but also to my employer to really show up 100%. And I wasn't sure that I could do that, being a first time mom. So again, just it really, it's about shifting something in your mind. Your mindset is shifting your mindset and not necessarily seeing promotions and advancements in a very traditional, and often people say a very antiquated way of, okay, this is me going up the ladder, as opposed to I can go lateral. And sometimes you may have to take a step back, depending on if you want to do a complete career pivot from going from, all my life I've been in career development, and all of a sudden I want to do accounting, right? So I may have to take a step back. I may have to gain certain skills and competencies and maybe certifications in order for me to make my way to becoming an accountant, right? But again, being very open-minded and just looking for opportunities everywhere, because they are endless. And once you have that mind shift, the opportunities are really, boundless.
So there's a question in the chat that I want to get to, and I think it's important. I'm gonna read the question, but I want to frame it a little bit too. The question is, how do you self-advocate and ask for more compensation when you are asked to do something extra that is within your skill but was not part of your original scope of work? So I want to come back to that and start, with this part where this idea of being able to identify the need. And because sometimes a big problem in working in an organization is that the people that you're working for, they don't know what they don't know, right? So part of it might be that, there's this thing that's not being fulfilled or being capitalized on, let's do it, let's take advantage of it. And that can be difficult, but it can really also drive your career to be able to, that's a really great skill set to have that ability to, one, be curious enough to go looking, and two, to spot that thing that can, be implemented, whether it's a project or some improvement. So there's that part of the question. The other part is, okay, but that's more work. Or what if you're asked to do it and I already have a full plate? So it's, you know, is it right for me to just go and do that? What are your thoughts on that?
So it depends, right? You have to think about, so if I were in that position, I would have to kind of get a sense of what other obligations that I have, what my career goals and aspirations, what do I like about my current work, what do I like about my current supervisor and my colleagues. You have to think it's like a confluence of different factors, right? And only you can determine, okay, I will accept this extra work, additional duties, because every job comes with additional duties.
Yeah.
And I am going to work my ass off and I am going to add tremendous value and always try to quantify that value that you're adding. And then 6 months down the road, you can go back to your supervisor. The proof is in the pudding. Hey, I've done X, Y, Z. I've saved the company X amount of money. I've increased learning by so and so. I've decreased this. Always try to quantify how you add your value to your organization. There's so many times where I've done lots of extra duties without asking for additional compensation. But you have to be strategic about it, okay? And you have to really figure out, can I put in the extra time and effort? And how can I convey, the value that I'm adding to my employer? And even if you don't necessarily have a direct line with your supervisor, find out who your advocates are, find out who your allies are. Other people can notice and they will speak on your behalf. That's like your sponsors and your mentors, right? And so it doesn't necessarily have to be speaking directly with your supervisor. People talk, people see things all the time. And it could be something as simple as, one of your colleagues, you're interested in, the type of work that one of your colleagues does, but you haven't had any direct opportunity to do that type of work. And that's a low risk way to just kind of get your feet wet, so to speak. Offer to help your colleague. Ask questions, try to fully understand what the project entails. And maybe you may have latent interest or strength that people don't even know about that can really lend itself to that project. And think of how appreciative your colleague will be at the end of it. All of a sudden, there's a spotlight on you for how you were so instrumental in, the completion of this successful project. It can look so many different ways, Emil. It's just a matter of, okay, everybody says, okay, what's in it for me? Yes, I get that. I don't think anybody does anything for free. For free. People tend to ask, so what's in it for me? But it's a two-way street. It's a two-way relationship. What's in it for your organization as well? So
I think that's a good segue into Laramie Gordon's question here. And in a sense, you've already answered it, but let's read it anyways. His question is, how can you engage folks in functional networking, that is collaborating in innovative ways so your relationship building feels more natural and mutually beneficial? I think that's really what you're saying. In a sense, it is functional networking. You're building a relationship where you're doing for others, and hopefully that's enough motivation for you. But often that really helps in career development as well.
yeah, and if you work for an organization where the culture it's very siloed, that can be very difficult. Where the expectation is for you to stay in your lane, keep your head down, and do your work, right? And I know just talking to a lot of my colleagues, some of them are in that position, and it can be so stifling, right? And I think that there was a recent Gallup poll that said 70% of employees will consider jumping ship because they're so disengaged in the workplace. They don't have opportunities for career advancement and career growth and development. I think that was like the top 1 or 2 reasons why many people leave, especially Generation X and Generation Y, right? And so ideally, your organization will have those types of systemic approaches where that can happen organically. But in a lot of cases, that's, it's non-existent. And so you just really have to use the power of your relationship building and the power of your networking. And so it could be something as simple as joining an affinity group, an employee resource group on campus, or you hear about, a project going on in a completely different department, get plugged in with somebody who is in the know, who knows somebody who's directly involved in in the project. Ask those questions, offer to help. And, not just saying, I'm here if you need help. Learn more about the project, do your research, send articles, get engaged in conversations that are happening online. And all of a sudden, your name starts popping up and people are like, oh, wow, this person is a valuable resource. That's just another way to really get involved, especially if the organization is not conducive or set up for a way where that can happen organically.
Okay, so that again, it leads us into this important subject of the network gap. And again, you sort of addressed it, but this is a bigger issue and an important one for us to discuss. And a reminder that Leslie Robinson will be talking about this at the end of, no, sorry, I think it's the beginning of April, first month of April. I think it's one of the last career development lunch and learns, but let's talk about it because we've already covered this this idea of networking quite a bit. Talk to me about what is the network gap?
So actually, it was LinkedIn who coined this phrase, the network gap. And all that is that it's a lack of social capital for certain groups of people or communities. It's a way that, where the advantage that some groups of people get over others just based on who they know, right? And according to LinkedIn, where you grew up, where you went to school, where you work, all of these things can give you like a 12 times advantage in gaining access to opportunities and outcomes, right? So in that vein, connections really matter when you're looking for a job, when you're looking for new opportunities, right? One of the things that I tell people all the time is, don't wait for the job or the opportunity to be posted, because the HR, the organization, they know weeks in advance, at least 3 to 4 weeks in advance before the job actually goes live. And some people have already vetted referrals for that particular job. And that's just one example as to why networking is so important. But we do have to recognize that certain communities, they don't have access, they don't have that social capital to be connected to those influential people that can really make or break their careers. And so we have to think about this. And I think somebody recently, I was in a webinar, some kind of conversation, I can't remember the forum, where this guy described, he called it the elevator theory. It's like when you finally get on the elevator and it takes you up, make sure you send it back down to grab as many people as possible. And so you create this internal pipeline of talent right here within your organization. And when you do that, your employees are less likely to go outside of the organization to pursue opportunities for career growth and development. I tend to say not necessarily advancement, because when you use the word advancement, people think linear, the ladder, right? And then the other thing, we tend to focus on job titles. That's important. It's still very important. But when we're looking for jobs, we're like, well, I did blank, so I'm going to search for opportunities using that one keyword and phrases. But job titles are not universal across, departments, organizations, or even industries, right?
Especially in the IT world, it's a real
Oh
problem.
my gosh, yeah. And Google has this nifty tool where you can type in one job title and it can tell you what's the most popular used job title. Same skill set, same competencies, but it tells you, based on this industry or in the US, rather than using administrative assistant, you fill in the gap. This is what's most commonly used. And so, okay, I may have to adjust my job search, as opposed to just looking through one title all the time, because that in itself can limit you to all the different opportunities that might be out there.
That's just sorry, go ahead.
I still believe that networking is the best way to find out about opportunities.
Yeah, and that's something, as I said, Leslie's here today, and Leslie comments in the chat that, this forum is an example of, a good networking opportunity, even virtually. That's why we really like people to use the chat, because it's not the same thing as face-to-face, granted, but it is a good way to start listening to people and making comments and growing that way. You talk about how you're reluctant to use the term advancement. I'm reluctant to use the term growth for the same reason. Like it sort of implies this thing, and it's just it's not about necessarily growth in terms of financial growth. It's just about going to a place where you're more fulfilled and where you're able to provide a greater service to other people.
And every employee, I don't know one employee that wakes up and says, I want to go to a job that I'm unfulfilled in.
Right.
There's nobody, right? And just slightly going back to the network gap, it's because of this network gap that it's incumbent upon employers to practice equitable hiring strategies, right? So one example is, don't just post and expect that everybody will flock to you just because you may consider yourself the bread and butter of employers, right? If you have underrepresented talent, you really have to, engage them where they live. It will require you to use, alternative outreach measures beyond just posting the job to really attract talent that are underrepresented in your organization. So,
and let's be frank. I mean, UT is a big violator of this. I mean, we are very proud of our community. We're very proud of our brand, and in a lot of ways, some hiring units rest on those laurels, thinking it's UT, we're in Austin, they will come to us. And not a lot of effort goes into really doing true recruitment. I mean, we're getting a little bit off base here, but it's an important thing for UT and other people who are overly reliant on their brand to be aware of.
Yeah, and it's not up to the prospective employee to try to navigate the hiring practices of the organization, right? It's really for the organization to establish those equitable practices and hold people accountable for the hiring decisions. When there's transparency in that, people's research shows that people have a tendency, it squashes bias in that process. So yeah, I tell people, I joke and I say, I'm lucky that I got hired at UT because I'm the minority at the university. So.
Yeah. And we're going to get back to, explicit bias or implicit bias in a little bit, but I want to lead into it with this. What about path jumping? So if the job that you want, or even if you're curious about it, and you touched on it in terms of, just doing some work to gain that experience, but it's not really connected to where you are right now. And it's seemingly not on the lattice. Like seems to be no connection. How does somebody jump from that seemingly unrelated career path? So as an example, let's say that someone is currently working on a grounds crew, like landscape services, and she wants to move into an administrative role. How does she do that? Aside from, or maybe in addition to, well, first you have to get the training. You have to, learn some of the basic skills. But how else do you go from something that seems to be in another universe than where you want to be?
It may, on the surface, it may seem like it's apples and oranges, but I tell people that want to do a complete career pivot, first of all, take stock of their current skills and accomplishments and really draw on the measurable ones. So figure out what are the similarities or what common skills that a landscaping person may have with somebody who is doing an administrative role. So if we were to poll the participants here, we'll probably get customer service, attention to detail, teamwork, problem solving, keeping cool under pressure. I don't know. There may be a wide variety.
Yeah.
A similar example to what you have is those, stay-at-home dads, for instance, who has said, you know what, I'm staying home for 5 years for me to take care of my kids, and then I'm ready to re-enter the workforce. How do I make that jump,
Yeah.
right? Because
Yeah,
I've
that's
been
good.
out, yeah, I've been out of the workforce for 5 years.
Mhm.
Well, you take a stock of what you've done being a stay-at-home dad, because we tend to have a very myopic view of what does a stay-at-home dad do? He stays at home with the kids, right?
Right.
But the dad does so much more than that. They participate in, there's organizational skills, they participate in PTA, there's just so many. We have to stop looking at different roles and responsibilities from what I term the consumer perspective, right? And so what the consumer's perspective is, when I was working directly with students, like, well, would you like to work at Walmart? No, Miss Bibi, why would I want to work at Walmart? I don't want to stock shelves. Okay, that's the consumer perspective, because when you go into Walmart, all you see is people
Gotcha.
checking out groceries and stocking shelves, right? They have an IT department, they have a sales department, they have a marketing department, there's a fraud department, there's a legal department. So again, you can do so many, you can have a thriving career at Walmart beyond just stocking shelves. And there's nothing wrong with stocking shelves, because as consumers, when the shelves are empty, no bueno, we don't like it. So every job is valuable, right? There's no such thing as a bad job, in my opinion, because there are always lessons and skills to learn. There's always new people to meet that can introduce you to new adventures, help you explore different areas that you never thought of. So again, the key is being open-minded, right? And so it's the same thing. So taking stock of what skills and accomplishments that you have, making sure you focus on the measurable ones, trying to identify what the common skills are. So those transferable skills, right? Start looking at administrative roles, the job postings, and getting familiar with the language that's being used, right? Once you have that, see who else in your network, and even those outside of your network, because sometimes your network can look like everybody who looks like you with the same experience, and that really doesn't help at times, right? So really diversify where you go look for advice. And talking to your HR partners, say, hey, if you don't feel comfortable talking to your direct supervisor, go to your HR person or somebody outside of your department and say, you know what, I've been doing this landscaping job for like 5 years, but here's why. Since COVID, because a lot of people are doing that pivot since COVID, I value XYZ more, and having this type of administrative job will lend itself, it will be more conducive for what I have going on in my life right now. I think I'll be more fulfilled. So knowing your why, it's not a huge stretch. It really isn't. And of course, figuring out, do I need key credentials in order for me to break into that career? And where can I find opportunities? It may not necessarily be available in your direct department, but again, you can look outside of your department, outside of your organization. Volunteer work still counts, even if it's unpaid work. Serving on a board still counts, even if it's unpaid work. It is experience, right? And so you can leverage those diverse experiences that kind of align with the type of competencies and skills and knowledge that most employers are looking for when they hire, folks for administrative roles. So not necessarily a big stretch. A lot of people are like, oh my God, are you crazy? Why? But no, again, look for the commonalities first, and then identify what your skills gap is, and then identify, really short term. I'm not saying go back for another 4-year degree, because the return on investment may not necessarily be worth it, right? But yeah.
So this is yet another reason why diversity is so important. If you think about hiring panels, hiring boards, hiring units, it's one thing, and Laramie made a comment on the chat saying that skills are more transferable than you would think. And what you're saying too is like, you know, that's all sort of on the applicant side or the individual side looking for a job, and understanding that, you know, what I've been doing as a stay-at-home parent, there's some skills here that I can really use in a different field. And that's important to understand. But what is maybe even more important is having people in the hiring units who have been in those situations and can recognize when a stay-at-home parent can be a valuable asset. And that's why it's so important to have diversity internally, because if you don't, like as you were just, you know, talking about in your intro, they don't know what they don't know, and so they're not able to identify what an asset those people can be to the organization.
Yeah, and you know, one Dropbox did something recently to create, that was their one step in creating more of an inclusive and work environment for their underrepresented talent. And it's a program called Your Career as a Jungle Gym. That's another metaphor people use. You know, it's the same thing to a career lattice, right? Jungle gym, you're all over the place. Same thing as a smartphone. We all start out with the same apps, but depending on, you know, my preferences, I may download different apps. You know, my phone is going to look vastly different to yours, although they maybe have some commonalities, right? And so that was one of their way to really grow the opportunities for their underrepresented talent. It was a year-long program, and they worked directly with their managers for stretch projects, which is very important because you can read all you want to read, you can attend webinars, conferences, but some skills, the only way you're going to learn it is if you have an opportunity to do it, right? No amount of reading and taking courses is really going to teach you how to do this thing well. You got to actually just do it. And so it's a year-long process. They work with their managers. And the reason why they work with their managers in stretch projects, because who are the people that are going to recommend them for promotions and advancements, right? Who's doing the performance evaluations? Their middle management, their direct supervisors. And that's why they work directly with them on those year-long stretch projects. Now, it doesn't necessarily have to be year long. It could be one of those, you know, micro projects that may be 6 weeks or 6 months, but it's doable. Now, the implementing a career lattice, it can be more complex than what meets the eye, you know, because I'm a huge proponent of, yes, we have a great website where people post jobs all the time. But I think that we assume that if we build it, people will come, right? Our employees are going to consistently look on the job board to see what opportunities are available to them and avail themselves to it. That's not necessarily the case, right? But I think that if we start building an internal forum where, you know, people have access to opportunities within our portfolio, within the university, and it's present mind, it's top of mind, they get emails about it, or whatever the format may look like. That's one effective way of communicating to our employees that, hey, we want you to know about these opportunities. We want you to apply for these opportunities, right? So the same vigor that we take and passion and care that we take for external candidates, I think that we should show our internal employees the same type of you know, courtesy, so to speak, you know, because they're here, you know, they're already contributing to the organization. So why not treat them with in the same manner or vein that we treat prospective external candidates, right? So, and I know it can get tricky with compensation. What if it's not a lateral move? You know,
Yeah.
that can get tricky. You know, learning and development is an essential component of career lattices. Career development is the number one thing that most prospective employers say they want out of an organization, beyond good benefits and salary. They want to know that they have opportunities to grow and thrive within the organization, you know, and you want them to know that they can actually do that here rather than looking outside of the organization. So.
Well, you know my opinion. We've had some pretty heated discussions about internal, you know, recruitment. And I feel very strongly about the benefits of having something like that at a large institution where there's really aggressive, proactive recruitment going on internally. Obviously, sometimes there's very good reasons why you want to hire somebody externally. But equally, there are really good reasons why you'd want to hire somebody internally as well. And that really ups the game for everybody. If we know that we're looking for top talent, high potential internally, then you have hiring units that are also equally sort of impassioned about retaining the top talent and high potential, staff. And that, rising tides at that point, because then you're really upping the game of everyone to make sure that they don't lose that top talent. And, that can make a big difference on productivity, effectiveness, engagement, satisfaction, all of those things.
Yeah, and there's lots of research, Emil, that really supports the idea of implementing a career lattice program and the rate of return on investment. You talk about increasing engagement, improving productivity, really enhancing high quality collaborative partnerships across the organization and within teams within one department. It brings fresh perspectives to solving problems. It reduces turnover. I think people don't realize the high cost of recruitment and replacing.
Yeah.
It's astronomical.
Yeah.
So is the cost of, I think on average, it's like 400 or $500 billion, disengaged employees cost organizations just in the US. That's crazy. And so both employees and employers can benefit from creating some semblance, of a career lattice.
So we have a participant, and I think that we were probably answering both of these while she was typing. But I'm gonna read the first. I'm gonna read the question first. Then she has a comment in the chat too. I found my calling very early in my career, so I've done nearly everything possible within that realm as a specialized nurse. I want to make a shift away from direct patient care, but still remain within my specialty. The wall I keep running into multiple employers is that I am told that I am indispensable at my current position, or I am too productive as it would take two to replace me. We hear this all the time, right? Applying to positions that are tangential, I find that I can't even get the interview. Do you have any tips around making a leap? So this is, we haven't quite addressed this because this is an important thing that happens as well. And I think is another reason why having an internal recruitment office would address this situation. So you don't have a situation where, a unit is saying, I don't want to promote her up because when I do, then we're not going to have somebody who can do their job. Part of this is succession planning on part of the person.
Talent hoarding. It avoids, it's talent hoarding. It's like, well, I'm not going to promote this person because that's going to create more problems for me. Now, I recognize that hiring managers, are strapped for time and resources. I get that. And I think the structure creates those types of situations. And it's unfortunate, it's just like, well, if I'm overqualified, then I could certainly do the job well, right?
Yeah.
Because a lot of people hear that get that response, well, you're overqualified, or you're too progressive, or, whatever that means.
Yeah.
Right. And it's unfortunate for the participant who's experienced this time and time again. You look again, what I've done personally, I use LinkedIn every single day of my life. And it's shameless plug. I really do. I believe in what they do. I believe in their platform. I have reached out to people all over the globe and I've asked for advice. I don't ask for feedback because when people ask for feedback, it's just like, oh my God, you're giving me homework? No. I ask for advice and I'm very specific in my advice, and I say, how can I circumvent this issue that I keep running into? And some people may say, you know what? There's certain organizations that are very intentional about hiring people who look like you, who have the experience. And then it may be you pivot into, okay, I'm only going to search for companies that have showcased on their website, where I reach out to people, former and current employees, and I hear about their real life experiences with the organization. Again, like Emily said, you don't know what you don't know. Ask for help, and that's why it's so important to have a diverse board of advisories. That's what I like to call them. People from so many different sectors I call upon, because I can borrow stuff from the private sector in the work that I do now. I can borrow from nonprofit, sector for the work that I do now. I always don't think about it in a very myopic view, because what good does it do if everybody in my network has similar skills, experiences to me? It just simply makes that one of us is obsolete, right? If everybody's the same, then somebody's obsolete, right? And so that's one piece of advice that I have for that participant.
So, and it related to what this person is asking about, one thing I would say, we only have a couple minutes left here, but the place that she's working, I don't think it's necessarily malicious, but they're taking advantage of her, and that's not right. The other thing is applying to positions that are tangential. We talked about this already, but related to it, how does one overcome, this is a huge and weighty question, but how does one overcome the biases of a hiring unit that might have as they think about a successful candidate, or what they think a successful candidate should look like, right? This is a very deep question. It has several different layers, but I think we need to address it.
First and foremost, Emil, I don't know if I can tackle that in 2 minutes, but first and foremost, I just want to say it is not up to the candidate to lean into the organization to figure out how can I, morph myself into, the person that they want to fit. So, UT does have a huge bias for cultural fit. Nobody can really define it, but cultural fit is code for, we want to hire somebody who looks like the rest of us. Okay. I cannot change my skin color. I cannot change that I present as female, right? And so constantly I'm hitting a wall. You can only hope that with EDI is not a new concept. It's not a new umbrella, right? But in light of so many other things that have happened in the past couple of years, there's a spotlight on it. And we're hoping that more organizations are moving towards, taking a microscopic look at what practices do we currently have that really creates barriers for underrepresented people. And that could be women, that could be Black people, that could be Asian, that could be LGBT, that could be people who have multiple disabilities. How are we creating barriers where, we say that we have equal opportunity because we post it on our website, but it's not enough to have equal opportunity. The outcomes have to match the opportunities as well, right? And so it's really up to the organizations to have like an internal check. How biased are we? Take a look at your data. Your data tells you a whole lot. Where do you need to focus your attention? And so I have a dear friend, Black male, that has experience on paper. He looks great. He interviews great. And it's always, you're just not the right fit for this. And I say, that's code for, you're not a white male, I'm sorry, and when you look at the company's websites, you look at the people who work there, current and former, they all look the same, right? And so it's a really tough one, because how else, you can't change your skin color, you cannot change your experience, you can't, how does one become overqualified and not be hireable?
Yeah. You say look at the data, but sorry.
I say these two things don't go together. If you're overqualified, that means that, I chose to apply for this job, knowing my qualifications, knowing the job description. There's a reason I chose this job, right? And even if the salary is posted or not, that's my decision. The employer doesn't get to decide for me just because they assume that I'm overqualified. No, that's bias at play, and so you'll tend to hire the same sets of people all the time, and you'll end up with a very homogeneous workforce.
I agree with you that look at the data. One of the problems is that they're not looking at the right data, or they're looking at the data in the wrong way. You can always manipulate data, and a lot of organizations are.
That's a whole nother hour.
Yeah, that's a whole other, well, that's a whole series. But anyway, Binta, as always, such a pleasure to talk to you. And we had really, again, great participation, and I appreciate everybody joining us. As I mentioned, this is going to be recorded. We'll put it up on our YouTube channel, and make sure that you join us again next week and the next 4 weeks going forward, as long as we don't have another ice storm. Thanks, Binta.
Thank you so much. I enjoyed. Bye, everyone.
You too. Bye-bye, everyone.